Iranian hardliners still cracking down on anti-government protests while holding more rallies of their own. Now, the Trump administration says all of this is proving that Obama's Iran deal was deeply flawed. So should we kill the deal to help the protesters? Hi, everybody. I'm David Aslan. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus to find out more with Steve Forbes, Rich Carlgard, Elizabeth McDonald, Sabrina Schaefer, John Tamny, and Capri Cafaro. So, Steve, next Friday is the deadline to certify or decertify Iranian compliance with the nuke deal. Should we decertify Iran and kill the deal?
Yes, David, it's a bad deal with an evil regime that's the biggest source of terrorism in the world. They've suppressed their own people. They're financing Hezbollah, which is killing thousands of people in the Middle East. You had that scandal Politico revealed a few weeks ago about how the Obama administration quashed an investigation and suppression of Hezbollah's drug deals. So it's a rotten regime, pressing its own people, spreading terror. Yes, get rid of the regime, and this is a good way to do it.
Well, John Tamny, President Trump says the Iran deal empowered the government and didn't empower at all the Iranian people, and that's apparently what the Iranian people are now saying. Let me just put up on the screen Donald Trump's tweet of earlier this week on this. He said, the people of Iran finally acting against the brutal and corrupt Iranian regime. All of the money that President Obama so foolishly gave them went into terrorism and into their pockets. The people have little food, big inflation, and no human rights. The U.S. is watching. What do you think?
Well, I don't think the protests have anything to do with the Iran deal. My problem with the Iran deal is that it elevates a regime that's not legitimate. Every time Democrats and Republicans make a big story out of Iran, they empower really bad people. And so to me, the answer is to not to enter into deals that are going to be broken in the first place, but to ignore that which is illegitimate. That is what will drive them from power, not deals that aren't worth the paper they're printed on.
But, Emac, the point is that the deal gave them so much money which they have used to expand their sphere of influence. You look at a map of the Middle East, they are in all kinds of places, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen. The protesters want them out. That's what they were chanting. They said death to Hezbollah, no to Syria, no to Yemen. The protesters want them out, and so do we.
Yeah, and the courage and bravery of and the heroism of the protesters, it's truly breathtaking and stunning. And you're right, the protesters are pointing out in Iran the sphere of influence that this corrupt, brutal regime has around the world. And I'll tell you something, David, when you oppress half of your economy, meaning women, you're going to be in the Stone Ages. That's what's happening. And that money went to the Iran regime, the Revolutionary Guard, the military, and the government, and the Ayatollahs. They oversee and own 2/3 of the assets in that country. They don't pay any taxes. They squash small businesses. That's what the people on the streets of Iran are saying. Enough. This theocracy is much younger than this very old country. This country is like thousands of years old. The people have had it. They're saying, get rid of these brutal dictators. They don't want it anymore. And they don't deserve the way the Democrats and the Obama administration officials are ignoring them to this day.
Capri, we also heard from Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, who talked about the economic mismanagement that Emac was just discussing. He said, we will not hesitate to call out the regime's economic mismanagement and diversion of significant resources to fund threatening missile systems at the expense of its citizenry. He thinks, and I think, frankly, that we have a lot in common with the protesters here.
We obviously do. I mean, obviously, these protesters in Iran, want to see democracy. They want to see freedom. They want to be empowered. And that's what they're fighting to do. And it does seem to me, from my understanding, and I don't claim to be a Middle East expert. I've focused more of my academic work on the former Soviet republics. But it's my understanding that a huge impetus behind the protests in Iran is because of very high unemployment, high inflation, and high prices. The lack of economic opportunity has really brought these folks to the streets, and no question about it, the mismanagement and mishandling of funds, including any of the assets that were available to them post-Iran deal. And I'm not weighing in on whether or not the Iran deal is good or bad, but it's clear that the government in Iran is not directing any of that towards the people of Iran to help them.
And Rich, President Obama said that one of the reasons for the Iran deal was bringing Iran out of the dark ages, which it had sunk into. But in fact, it was empowering the people that want to keep it in the dark ages, no?
That is correct, and I think that Secretary of State John Kerry and President Obama were so concerned about their legacy that all along the way they made compromises that kept the government in power. I love the point that EMAC made. You know, there are so many bright, ambitious, accomplished Iranians in the United States. They tend to call themselves Persians. You know, and all we have to do is remove this crappy government, and this economy in Iran will boom because it's full of ambitious, bright, entrepreneurial people.
Well, and Sabrina, let's be specific about how much money the mullahs came into as a result of the Iran deal. It was at least $100 billion that had been held by the United States, accumulated interest. We released $100 billion. Plus, there was all that trading going on with Europe. And in spite of all that new money, the people are still suffering. So it's clear that the mullahs are stuffing their pockets with the cash and using it to expand their influence in countries where they don't belong.
And I think it's that juxtaposition, David, between this idea that we were injecting $100 billion into the economy that would somehow help the working Iranians, and instead it went to places like Yemen and Gaza and Syria, which was killing its own people. It's hard not to imagine wanting to take to the streets for this. Of course, I think that this is also an interesting opportunity for the Trump administration to use human rights as a leverage here when they go back to the negotiating tables next week.
John, let me just put up that map again, if I can, of the spheres of influence that Iran has gone into with their newfound wealth. You look at where they are now and how they are expanding their influence, particularly in a place like Iraq, where we spent thousands of lives, of our own lives, and trillions of our own money trying to secure that country. That's where the Iranians are going right now. Don't we have a role to play when they are going into places that we've spent so much of our treasure on?
Well, I suppose, but I would argue that if we shouldn't have spent so much treasure there in the first place. I don't see the advantage we get from being over there, but I'm hearing these $100 billion arguments. What if the government had distributed them to the people? That sounds like something the Democrats make when they say that we need to redistribute the wealth of the rich. The reality is the country is backwards economically. Well, you don't move the country forward economically by dealing with a regime that's illegitimate. You move them forward by ignoring them so that they're forced out of power.
But Steve, again, the point is it's tough to ignore people that are expanding their ways, not only in places where we've spilled our own blood, American blood, but places where we're trying to help our allies develop more democratic ways.
That's right, David, and Iran wants us out of the world, David. That's why they're developing ballistic missiles to reach the United States. That's why they have a full-fledged nuclear program, a la North Korea, to blackmail and hit the United States. So these people are ideologues, corrupt ideologues, but they're ideologues who want us out. They want to control much of the world. So if we ignore them, they're not going to ignore us. And the idea that if we ignore them, they'll go away, tell that to the Cubans, tell that to the North Koreans. Bad people tend to stick around.
And we shouldn't ignore the freedom fighters, particularly after ignoring them in 2009. This is apparently much more widespread than the protest in 2009. So there is an opportunity. Gang, good discussion.